Remember what I was saying earlier on about ASEAN being a group of nation states, wherein the idea of security and stability was seen in terms of the relationship with other states. In other words, to a large extent, the ASEAN project, from 67 onwards, and now the ASEAN Community project, right, is really a project that's directed at interstate relations. Okay? Despite the fact that there is an emphasis on people, it's still about interstate relations. More so when you talk about the ASEAN Political Security Community. The idea is that you're talking about states interacting with one another, with shared norms and values, wherein, and this is where the ideas of the people-centric, people-orientedness of ASEAN comes in. Democracy is a norm that is central to the whole project. Good governance and the rule of law is supposed to be emphasized. Okay? And then the promotion and protection of human rights. So even within the context of yung political security community, lumalabas na tayo doon sa traditional na konsepto natin ng ano ba ang security. Kasi ine-emphasize na natin dito ngayon yung security ng tao. So within that context, importante na magkaroon ka ng isang sistema na kung saan medyo democratic yung political system mo, na kung saan rule of law yung namumuno, pagkatapos yung promotion and protection of human rights is central to the whole thing, right? Now again, these are aspirations. Okay, these are aspirations. Even by 2015, you don't expect all of the ASEAN states to suddenly transform themselves overnight into democracies, right? That's not going to happen, right? And neither are we going to expect that all of them will suddenly have commissions on human rights that will be checking on human rights violations in their respective countries. Okay? So sa madaling sabi, andyan yung aspiration na yan, and this is one of the things that I'm saying about being a work in progress, right? Democracy is something that will be a process. It's going to be democratization rather than the establishment of democracy per se. And good governance in the rule of law will always be seen largely in terms of the provision of economic goods. So yung protection of human rights will be seen largely in terms of the regional commission more than anything else. Okay? Next slide, please. And then, another aspect of the political security community that becomes important is the shared responsibility for comprehensive security. Now, why is that important? Because in ASEAN, the framework for security, even as there was an emphasis on trying to make sure that relations among the big powers do not translate into competition or into conflict within Southeast Asia, the emphasis, because of the development orientation, the emphasis was really on internal. Okay? And comprehensive security involves the different issue areas that could be a source of threat or vulnerability to the nation state. Okay? So ano ibig sabihin nun? Ang ina-emphasize nila noon, economic vulnerability. So kailangan maging economically advanced or progressive yung mga ASEAN states. So when you talk about comprehensive security, a large part of it actually emphasizes economic development. Okay? But not only that, because you're talking about being able to make sure that the welfare of people are also taken care of. But welfare here is defined by not the people, by the state. So ano sa tingin ng Estado ang mga dapat may bibigay sa mga tao. So yun yung natin sa comprehensive security. It's a top-down kind of concept. But the important thing about it is that it includes. So it's not only about I guess military security or the idea of defense as a security focus. Pero ang natin is the promotion of peace and stability in the region. Okay? And conflict resolution and Pacific settlement of disputes, as something that ASEAN would like to emphasize, And then, of course, post-conflict peace building. Remember that ASEAN is still very much a region where a lot of conflicts are actually taking place. No, it's not just Mindanao that we're talking about. No, Thailand, southern Thailand, no, is an area where you actually have an active insurgency. Never mind what is going on in Bangkok, for instance. No, in Indonesia, they still have the insurgency in Irian Jaya. No. And of course, when you go to Myanmar, isang tambak din ang mga conflicts yung meron pa dyan. So, you're still talking about the need for some sort of post-conflict peace-building arrangements. And ideally, this ought to be done at the level of the region. So, parang may mga peacekeeping centers, ang iba't ibang mga bansa dyan, i-network natin yung mga yan, so that this could be the basis for the development of peace operations across the region. Hindi lang peacekeeping, you're still talking about things like rehabilitation as well, of conflict areas. And then the last part is, of course, what I was emphasizing earlier on, non-traditional security issues. Increasingly, most countries in the region are recognizing that yung threat sa security, or at least when the I guess what has to be emphasized is when the ASEAN community was conceptualized, right? The most important security issues that were being discussed then had to do with non-traditional security, right? Ang pinaka-importante noon was the pandemics, So you had SARS as one example of that. And then aside from that, you had, of course, disaster relief. Management. The idea was that all of these issues, and you can add to that, the issue of transnational crime, right? So that includes drug trafficking, human trafficking, and of course small arms trafficking, But these are issue areas na kung saan hindi pwedeng yung isang bansa will go back to traditional self-help measures, right, in order to address them. Because you're talking about transnational issues already, right? So that means you need to cooperate with others. So it is an ASEAN issue rather than sabihin natin a national security issue, right, alone. Okay? They are national security issues, but they need to be addressed with the help of parang Beatles yan, with a little help from my friends, right? So yung ibang mga member ng ASEAN kailangan involved din dyan. Okay? With all of that then, ang problema ng ASEAN has always been that it talks big. Right? It talks big. But when it comes to taking action, doon ka nagkakaroon ng problema. This is not a knock on what Yusek Bala was saying earlier on. But if you will notice, and this is typical, yung presentation niya kanina gave us all of the achievements of what ASEAN has been able to achieve at this point in time, right? But most of them, not all of them, most of them are declarations, statements, joint statements, and agreements. Okay. The problem is always the translation of those agreements, statements, into actionable things, actionable things that will be implemented by the members of ASEAN. Okay? We're still back at the issue of ano ba ang mga dapat gawin ng ASEAN in order to operationalize the things that it aspires to. In fact, what is interesting was that back in 2011, I think it was, Indonesia became the chair of the ASEAN, the chair of ASEAN. Okay? And what the Indonesians decided at that particular point was that they are not going to introduce anything new to ASEAN. Kasi ang ASEAN, yung mga chairs niyan, para yung mga administrasyon natin dito, Pag bago yung administrasyon, kailangan may bago siyang proyekto na i-introduce, So may bagong konsepto na ipapasok, at saka they decided that they're not going to do that. Okay? Instead, they began to emphasize the idea that everything that we've committed ourselves to, that was what Indonesia was going to push during the year that it was chaired. Okay? So, i-revisit natin yung mga commitments natin, implement natin sila, hanapan natin operationalization, and then enforce natin yan. Okay? It was hoping that after their chairmanship, the other chairs would follow in their footsteps. Didn't quite happen that way. No? But the point was, there was a need to revisit and see what needed to be implemented. No? Now, to be fair to ASEAN, okay, hindi lang naman puros chat-chat ang ASEAN. As Yusek Bala emphasized, a number of things have actually been put into place. No? And this has to do with, again, going back to the governance questions, no, and the security questions. No? Number one, as far as governance is concerned, is the increasing involvement of civil society, no, with ASEAN. Okay? So, civil society processes have, civil society processes, no, involving their cooperation with ASEAN have actually emerged. No? There's the ASEAN People's Assembly, no, which went on for quite some time, civil society conferences. Remember what Yusek Bala was saying earlier on kanina, na parang nagkaroon ng conference. And during the conference, there was a meeting between members of civil society and the leaders, right, of ASEAN. The main problem there, and this is what we can be very critical about, is that even as there's a commitment to greater cooperation with civil society, there are still some states wherein the political leadership is still very uncomfortable with civil society. So ang tendency nila is like what Yusek Bala said, some of those, some countries in ASEAN did not have civil society representatives because the leaders did not want to meet with them. So may ganun ka pa rin klase ng relasyon. This all goes back to the idea that ASEAN is still very much an intergovernmental association. Okay? So even though there's an agreement that we will do this at the regional level, the leaders and the states themselves still decide on whether or not they're going to implement it. Okay? And so there are consultation processes, and of course the ASEAN Human Rights Body are things that can be rightly called achievements. Okay? But again, the human rights body is still very long on rhetoric, rather than on its ability to actually act on human rights. If you look at one of the important developments as far as human rights is concerned, that you will find in the Charter and in the political security blueprint is the emphasis on the idea that the Human Rights Commission is supposed to provide, there's a commitment in ASEAN to the promotion and protection of human rights. Dati-dati laging promotion lang yan. Yung protection, hindi yan pumapasok sa usapan. Ngayon, officially, ASEAN is committed to the protection of human rights. But in implementing that, you still have problems because when you look at the human rights body itself, the ICHR, hindi pa rin siya tumatanggap hindi siya yung klase ng body that receives complaints, and investigates. Okay? That's not yet part of its mandate. It can be in the future, but it is not yet there. Okay? So, what it does is the promotion of human rights. Okay? That's what it does best. Excuse me. Okay? Next slide, please. At the same time, you also have some developments. Remember what Yusek Bala was saying, na parang the surprise of the century is probably the fact that Myanmar is closer to democratization than some of the other members of ASEAN, the more established members of ASEAN. Okay? And so parang yung democratization sa Myanmar, malaking role ang ginampanan ng ASEAN doon, in trying to guide the process itself and trying to push it forward. It sets the tone for cooperation in the region, and still the basis for normative structures, especially when it comes to democratization and human rights. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is where it still falls short, as far as this issue is concerned. Economic gaps in ASEAN. So, di ba tuwing pinag-uusapan natin yung mga GDP and you have the original members plus Brunei, no? And then, of course, the CLMV countries, di ba? That hasn't been quite addressed yet, no? And that's why the AEC is an important aspect of the whole process of integration, no? Like I said, sa human rights, no, is the question of implementation, no? You have a human rights declaration already, no, which has become, or which is the basis now of what of the framing of human rights in the region. The problem with it is that apparently it falls short. Kasi ang demand ng mga human rights activists, no, is that if ASEAN is going to adopt a human rights declaration, it should be no less than what you already find in the UN. Right? Parang sa UP, sinasabi, pagka nagkaroon ka ng rule, no, na or something that needs to be implemented by different units, no, at the lower levels, no, pwedeng baguhin yan ng mga units sa lower level, but they have to be stricter in the implementation. Okay? Same thing here. Parang ang nangyayari ngayon dito, no, ang demand nila was, if you're going to introduce, no, a regional human rights declaration, then it had better be no less than okay, what you actually find in the UN declaration already. Problema hindi. No? There are some elements in the UN declaration that are not in the regional declaration. So sinasabi nga nila, may pagkukulang pa rin dyan. Crisis management. No? Bakit? Tandaan nyo, nagkaroon ng crisis doon sa Scarborough Shoal. No? ASEAN couldn't do anything about that. Right? In other words, part of the problem of ASEAN is that when you have a crisis, a political crisis that could lead to potential for conflict, no, ASEAN is not built to actually address that. Okay? Ang ng ASEAN is that it can provide the framing whereby we can live peacefully with one another. Right? But when that peaceful existence is threatened, ASEAN is not in a position to do anything about it. Right? So while peace is there, okay lang. Right? But when it's threatened in some way, no, then you can't do anything about it. No? And then of course, institutionalization. Next please. So, ang ngayon natin dito is that problems that are actually facing ASEAN is with those weaknesses, ito yung mga ngayon. ASEAN centrality is threatened by the fact that you have an intensifying competition between the United States and China. No? That's not something that ASEAN can easily manage. Right? And that power dynamics is increasingly becoming the issue that needs to be addressed within the region. It's now the overarching issue that needs to be addressed. No? And pumapasok pa ang Japan doon sa usapin din na yon. No? So the main problem now is how effective is ASEAN going to be, no? Even if we have an ASEAN community by 2015, in pushing, no, East Asian regionalism and all of those that we actually associate, especially with the question of political and security issues. Okay? And so, I will end there and I welcome whatever questions that you might have later on. Thank you.